Good Wednesday morning, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. I don't get nervous often doing this show. I'm a little nervous today, though, because as I've joked before, brevity has never been my strong suit. We're going to try to squeeze in, like 4 topics, probably like 5 topics, 2 guests, all of this over the course of the hour, including your questions and comments. I'm a little nervous about getting it all done today, but there's a lot of stuff that we kind of need to do, so we'll do our part to get it done. It's our buddy Ben Wolk later on in the program. Auburn has been a dumpster fire all year long. Ben's been on the inside of that. He'll give us some of the details on exactly just how nasty it's gotten behind the scenes at Auburn, and he'll update us on Jaden Hazelwood and Nakobe Dean, who just took visits to Auburn. Dean's taking a visit to Georgia this weekend. Hazelwood will be here in a couple of weeks, so that's good stuff. Our buddy Mike Griffith also here as well, so you've picked a great day to be with us as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Normally off the top of the show, we like to take one big issue and really attack it, whatever's important that day for Georgia football fans, we try to do. This is a weird day, though, where there's a lot of little stuff going on, and I kind of feel like we need to hit it all, so buckle your seatbelts here. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground here off the top of the program before we get rolling with everything else we have planned for today. Let me start with this. There's a little chatter out there that the Georgia-Auburn rivalry, as we know it, could change. The Deep South's oldest rivalry, as it's so famously known as, could be heading for an evolution here, and it's being pushed for by Auburn. But maybe Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity also cooperating with this too. Let me start with Alan Green, the new Auburn Athletic Director, as quoted by AL.com, the big news entity over there in the state of Alabama. Green, who spoke to one of those touchdown clubs there, I believe it was in Birmingham, really making a strong suggestion here about how the Georgia-Auburn rivalry schedule should look different. Green says it doesn't matter how spaced out the games are, just not having to play Georgia and Alabama in the last 3 games of the year. Just some breathing room. I think it's better for the conference that way as well. So what Alan Green is saying there, the Auburn Athletic Director, is right now in the month of November, Auburn plays Georgia, then it plays Alabama, and he wants some space in between those games. And Greg McGarity, the Georgia Athletic Director, was quoted in Athens Banner Herald, and it sounds like McGarity might be willing to cooperate with Alan Green on this, at least based on the way that I read this quote. Let me show you McGarity from the Athens Banner Herald on this subject. You know, he's asked, hey, would you be willing to do what Auburn wants to do? McGarity says, I think the one weekend we're focused on keeping is the Florida weekend due to the the NFL dynamic, I'm not sure what that even means, and the plans that people have had. As we'll see later, there'll be movement probably to other games. Who thought we'd be opening the season with Vanderbilt, which Georgia will do next season. McGarity goes on to say, the main thing is a rivalry will stay in place. We'll continue to play Auburn on an annual basis for the near future. Once again, that's Greg McGarity, the Georgia Athletic Director, to the Athens Banner Herald. So Auburn wants the Georgia-Auburn game played earlier in the season. Greg McGarity seems willing to cooperate. Now, the other issue here is what's important to the coaches. It sounds like, based on what the coaches said back last summer, the idea of when the game is played is not as important to them, but the fact that for Auburn, it's road games at Georgia and Alabama in the same season, followed up by a home game every single year. That's apparently a big deal to Auburn coach Gus Malzahn, and this past summer he said as much. Here's Malzahn's idea on how the Georgia-Auburn schedule should look.
I think the big thing is having them staggered, one at home and one away.
Yeah.
Would probably be the best for those 2 at the end. You know, last year was 2 at home. This year it's 2 away. And look back in 2010, you know, we played Georgia at home, we played Alabama away, and you know that would be my wish.
Now, once again, this may be a situation where Georgia might actually cooperate with Green, the AD, Malzahn, the coach, give the Tigers what they want, because when Kirby Smart spoke on this at SEC spring meetings in Destin, Florida, he also pointed out that the fact that they play, the scheduling the way that it goes is not his favorite thing, and he harkens back to when Georgia did Auburn a favor by giving back-to-back trips to Auburn to accommodate for Missouri and Texas A&M joining the league, and Kirby Smart said back then he wants that favor returned. Now, this audio's not perfect, but I think you should still be able to make out what Kirby Smart has to say here.
Yeah, absolutely. If we get a chance to fix that and return the favor that we paid to them. I hear about that a lot. Obviously, I wasn't there, but about the 2 times they had to travel back to back, I think if we can make it more consistent and we balance things out, probably be helpful in the long run. But I got a feeling there's more to it than just us and them. You know, it always affects so many other moving parts, but it would be nice to do that.
When Kirby talks about balancing things out there, what he's referencing is the fact that for Georgia, a lot of its marquee regularly scheduled home games happen in the same year. It's Tennessee, it's Auburn, it's Georgia Tech on the same cycle. Opposite of that, you really got I guess South Carolina right now as the expected traditionally scheduled home game that flip-flops those dates. So that's kind of what he's talking about there, and Kirby went into a little bit more detail about the idea of getting that returned favor from Auburn and getting that home versus away schedule with Auburn cleared up. Here's more from Kirby back in the summer.
Yeah, I feel like if we fix it from that perspective, it would help, and it would help with not having 2 road games back-to-back for us in the situation we had like this year with the Auburn and the Georgia Tech back-to-back. But it's not exactly way high up on the priority list. I understand there's problems and difficulties trying to appease everybody, especially with the SEC conference having to do it. And the way I understand it, the reason it happened the first time was because of the addition of the 2 teams.
So, listen, here's one of those moments where I have to ask myself, is this me just being petty, or is my concern the real concern? Because I don't think that Georgia ought to be all that willing to cooperate with Auburn. I think that as much as it was a bad thing for Georgia when it went back-to-back to Auburn years ago, as it stands now, Auburn's got the bigger issue than Georgia does when it comes to scheduling. And if the shoe was on the other foot, somehow I have a hard time believing that Auburn would be bending over backwards looking to help out Georgia's schedule here. So I think that Georgia should be careful about doing a whole lot to help Auburn. Even if Kirby Smart wants the return date and he wants to, separate the fact that you play at Auburn and at Georgia Tech in the same year, even if he wants that, I feel like it's almost to Georgia's, benefit to argue that should be flip-flopped anyway because Georgia did this a few years ago. But the idea of moving what has traditionally been a Georgia-Auburn game played in November earlier in the season, that's the kind of thing I'd just be very careful with here. First of all, because I do like the idea of this big traditional rivalry for Georgia coming late in the year, standing as a bit of a referendum on the year. Something about that just seems right. And while I can understand why Auburn would want to separate its game with Georgia and its game with Alabama, if Georgia moves this Auburn game, it's only going to get that tough, challenging rivalry game closer to the one it plays against Florida or the one it plays against Tennessee, or even the one that plays against South Carolina. If you start moving this stuff around, I think if you're Georgia, going to be very careful about bunching the Auburn game too close to another game and creating the same kind of scenario for Georgia that Auburn's currently dealing with. I'm not saying there's no circumstance with which Georgia ought to cooperate with Auburn, but when it comes to a hated rival like this, I think you got to be very careful about just how much rope you're willing to give them here. Of course, there's also a chance that I'm being petty on that. If you want to weigh in the comment section or on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, we will give you a chance to do so. That is not the only kind of peripheral issue, though, that's being kicked around here when it comes to Georgia-Auburn this week. As you know, we've talked about this here on DawgNation Daily a lot already this week. Georgia fans wanted a blackout on Saturday, hearkening back to what had happened in 2007, wearing the black jerseys. It's really kind of a groundswell of support from Georgia fans, but this issue is apparently getting no support from Georgia coach Kirby Smart. Here is he again from last night saying, blackout, black jerseys, I ain't worried a bit about that.
We did it a couple years ago against somebody. I think it was one of the to-buy teams or something, and really for energy and enthusiasm. I don't think you need energy and enthusiasm for Auburn. If we can't get up for Auburn, then we've got some other problems, and we got to be excited to play. And I just don't think that's not relevant to me. It's not. I'm not saying that we're not ever going to do it. I'm not saying that we are. That's just not really what's important to me. That's just me. I believe in the guys going out and playing physical, playing hard, and you don't have to do things like that to get them fired up to do it. I really think they should want to do it. It was great for recruiting, so.
This is kind of a divisive issue for many fans. I understand that. But what I think is interesting here is how matter-of-fact Kirby Smart is about it. This is something that he clearly wanted to talk about. He gives a pretty detailed answer here. I think he anticipated the question to come at some point in time when he met with the media. And it's not one of those things where he pretended not to even know that it was an issue. He knows it's an issue, and it's something that he doesn't think that Georgia ought to be doing. So from that standpoint, Kirby's pretty engaged on this issue, although not necessarily giving the answer that some fans want him to give. In fact, when kind of pushed on it even more, he had a little bit even more to say. Here's more from Kirby on the non-blackout, as it turns out.
It doesn't surprise me anything fans do. It doesn't surprise me at all.
Traditional home red.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I'm not really concerned with that. I'll let you guys get the hits and the likes on that. I just want to get the team ready to play.
So obviously I think that Kirby's right on this. I think that black jerseys for big games is the kind of motivational ploy that brings back too many bad memories of what went wrong for Georgia in 2008 and 2009. Ultimately, it's probably not that big of a deal, and as I said yesterday, if a majority of Georgia fans favored this, I guess I wouldn't try to stand in the way of this happening. But there is a part of me that does take some comfort in knowing that Kirby Smart wants to keep, as he likes to say, the main thing, and the action on the field is going to be a lot more important to him than the laundry that Georgia's wearing, and that's just right by me. One more story to get to here before we kind of move on with the rest of the program. I told you we would be busy here. The other thing that comes up are some, reports that Mel Tucker, the Georgia defensive coordinator, could be interested in the Maryland job, that Maryland could be interested in Tucker. It's not necessarily a surprise for a top 5 team to have coordinators in the mix for head coaching jobs. This happening, though, here as the calendar turns to November. Is there worry about a distraction? Kirby says no, and he credits Mel Tucker as the reason for why. Here's more from Kirby.
Mel's one of the most professional people I've ever met. He's worried about these guys on his team. He's worried about coaching his tail off for them, leading the defensive unit, making the calls. I've been there and done that. I know what that's like to have your name mentioned in a lot of jobs, and I know that Mel's focus is on getting our guys ready to play.
And that's certainly good to hear, because getting focused on getting ready to play, I think it's important for Georgia. It's 3 relatively interesting issues, one involving the Georgia schedule, one involving the Georgia uniform, and one involving a Georgia assistant. None of those 3 things actually impact the action on the field for Saturday, and I think a lot of Georgia fans are looking forward to the rest of the week being more devoted to what is a big game against a rivalry opponent that looks to beat the Georgia Bulldogs. That's what matters for UGA, is it tries to continue its path toward a playoff. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Hello to you, no matter how you're getting to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found, the Apple Podcast Player, Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com, SoundCloud, a lot of different places you can access this program. We really appreciate you doing that, and appreciate Marco's Pizza for making it all possible. We love Marco's because it's authentic Italian quality pizza, Gianmarco family recipe in the sauce, 3 cheeses blended, melted together, and what a great offer they have for you. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for $6.99 each. That's every store, every day, the Italian way. Find more online, including the location close to you, at marcos.com. All right, later on in our program, we welcome back an old friend, our buddy Benjamin Wolk, a former colleague of ours, still covering the Auburn Tigers. We'll get into him, the Jaden Hazelwood visit, the Nakobe Dean visit, 2 recent Georgia targets at Auburn. We'll hear from Ben on that, and also the turmoil behind the scenes for Auburn. Ben will have some interesting things to say about that coming up in a couple of minutes, too. It's also our buddy Mike Griffith coming up here as well. Before any of that, though, let's go around the doghouse here on this Wednesday, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And another big story we need to talk about here for a moment is the fact that we saw a decommit and a commit, essentially a flip yesterday, from Georgia recruiting target, the very good-looking defensive back from the junior college ranks, DJ Daniel. Daniel exits his South Carolina commitment and joins up for Georgia's 2019 class. And this is the kind of thing I think a lot of us expected to happen, even on the day that he committed to South Carolina. Things have a way, when they are a little too weird, a little too unusual to be believed, those things have a way of correcting themselves over time. And there was some evidence, even when Daniel made the commitment to South Carolina, that it was the kind of thing that might not quite stick. Let me give you an example of that. Let me let you hear Daniel speaking to Jeff Sintel about when he made the South Carolina decision here. He's actually speaking to the entire gaggle of reporters. Here is Daniel kind of explaining that South Carolina decision at the moment. When you listen to it now, I think it foreshadows what happened yesterday for him. Here is Daniel in his own words.
Just being on the background when I didn't have no offers at first, and how they just stayed with it, stuck with me. How they just been straightforward to me. Coach T-Rob, how they kept it real with me. Coach Muschamp.
When did you decide that it would be South Carolina?
Just a few minutes ago.
Listen, recruiting decisions are very tough, but when that young man says a couple of minutes ago, before he made the announcement on video, we were showing you the video of him making that South Carolina choice, when a guy says just a couple minutes prior to this, I made my choice, those kinds of last-minute decisions, I think, have a way of not really sticking over the long haul. What matters most are the long-term relationships you've established. And DJ Daniel at one point told Jeff Sentell, this is back from early August, just how much Georgia had worked to get in close with him and his family. And ultimately, these are the kinds of things that really win when it comes to recruits. Here is Daniel explaining what he likes about Georgia.
What's the best thing you like about Georgia?
Just the love, the communication, not just with me. They talk more to my family than me. So I just know it's just love there and just being straightforward to me.
Listen, I think it is unusual for Georgia to be going after a junior college defensive back. They wouldn't be chasing Daniel if this staff didn't think he was very good. And this year, among the highest strengths of the Georgia team has been its secondary. Obviously, we know that DeAndre Baker is on his way out, heading towards the NFL. Georgia has to replenish that roster with recruiting this season. There's some big names in the high school ranks we obviously talk about a lot, but don't count out DJ Daniels being a major factor here as well. I think Georgia's interest in him validates who he is as a player, and I think he's got a very interesting future coming up at the University of Georgia. And of course, Around the Doghouse here on Wednesdays is presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You know what they do by now because I talk to you about them every week. They provide foundation repair, basement waterproofing, crawl space encapsulation, and they also offer a lifetime of support. So give them a call right now at 678-ESOG-NOW. That number once again, 678-ESOG-NOW, and have one of their qualified professional technicians come out to your home, check your cracked foundation, wet basement, damp crawl space. They are the only foundation repair company we trust around DawgNation because they're the only one with a full-time engineer on staff. Great to have them with us. Great to have you with us as well. And now for more on a very busy week for the Georgia Bulldogs, let's talk to our buddy Mike Griffith right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Mike Griffith. It's always fun to have him on our program on Wednesdays here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And, Mike, let me start with a word of thanks here because I really appreciate your willingness to ask questions to Kirby Smart that are on the minds of fans. You know, most of us, me included because I'm always in the studio, we don't get a chance to speak directly to Kirby Smart very much. But you do on behalf of the readers and listeners and viewers around DawgNation. And obviously one of the hottest topics this week has been, you know, the black jerseys and the idea that that Georgia might go back to the 2007 ranks and do a blackout against Georgia on Saturday. That's been on the mind of people this week. I appreciate you bringing that up with Kirby Smart. What did you make of how, I guess, resolutely he refuted the notion that that was a good idea?
Well, you know, I think, you know, Kirby looks at it differently in terms of, you know, bigger problems for him, you know, how to win the game, the issues that Auburn presents. The jerseys to him, Kirby's deal is this. He's trying to teach a young team how to take a professional approach week in and week out. And you noticed it earlier this year, right from the get-go, BA, back when South Carolina was doing all that crowing about, you know, and Sports Illustrated wrote how this was a trendy upset at South Carolina, and then it was Danny Sheridan talking about Missouri was the team, and you know, then we heard all about Florida and Kentucky with the time. And Kirby, there's a method to his madness because Georgia can't possibly get all emotional and up for all these teams. It's not possible. We all want to do our best every day at our job. But realistically, there's just some days we're better than others. And Kirby's method is to teach Georgia, look, you've got to take a balanced and even approach to all of this. You know, you need to, you know, treat all these games as important. There's only 12 opportunities. And that's why you haven't seen Georgia buy in a lot to, you know, a lot of this off-the-field type of talk we've seen and hype. And I think Kirby looks at the jerseys, at least what he said last night when I asked him the question, is kind of a gimmick. You know, to create energy, to create enthusiasm. And he said that in reference to when he chose to wear them with the team in the 2016 Louisiana Lafayette game. He says you don't need black jerseys to get excited for Auburn. Now, conversely, BA, I wonder, having been on the other side of the 2008 black jersey game at Alabama, I think what Kirby realizes is that when you wear a jersey or do something out of the norm, it does as much to motivate the opponent as it does the team wearing them.
What I thought was also interesting about this, Mike, is this seemed like a question that Kirby Smart was ready for, wanted to answer. He acknowledges it does help with recruiting a little bit. The future players do seem to like the black jerseys. The fact that Kirby still doesn't wear them for a game like this, when fans want it, when recruits want it, means, as you said, there's a significant reason why. Kirby Smart sometimes is energized by answering questions and sometimes truly seems to not really care. One way or another, this does seem to be something that Kirby Smart cares about, even if the answer that he gave is not necessarily the one that most Georgia fans, or at least a strong contingent of Georgia fans, would like.
Well, I think he wants his fan base to understand, who he is and what he's about, and get on the same page with Kirby. I also asked him about Jacksonville, B.A. I don't know if you saw
I did.
that.
That's great.
And he was honest. He said it hurts recruiting, but it's just always been done that way. That contract goes through 2021, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw the series split between Athens and Jacksonville after that. But I think Kirby's honest. I think he's up front. And to your point, I think he did want to answer it. And I think he does want fans to understand what he's trying to do here at Georgia, and when those black jerseys make the most sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Georgia-Florida thing, and Mike, this is one of those deals, and I think as a reporter you understand this. What Kirby said yesterday in reference to your question about Georgia-Florida is going to turn into a bigger story later than it is right now, because obviously with good reason there's a lot of focus on the Auburn game this week. But I thought that Kirby's words on the Georgia-Florida thing, and just because we're so busy with everything else, that's not something that I'm going to dive into a lot here today. But over the course of the next few weeks, certainly the next couple of months, the candid way that Smart spoke about that game with you and the other reporters in the room, and the impact I think negatively it could have on Georgia recruiting in terms of the opportunity to host recruits, I feel like those words from Kirby are going to reverberate into a bigger story later than it's probably going to end up being this week.
No doubt about it. And again, this is Kirby Smart's program, and this is the guy that Georgia has entrusted to take the Bulldogs to a championship level. And, I put some things out on social media. Again, I'm coming in from the outside. I guess I want everyone to know how much I respect Georgia tradition. Having followed the FCC all my life and covered it for 25 years, Georgia's always been a program I held in high regard, even when I would do the shows with you before I was on the Georgia beat. So much respect for what Georgia football is, and mind-boggling that they haven't won a national championship in more than 35 years. And so here comes Kirby Smart, and here come the facilities improvement, BA. Here comes Georgia spending the money to get the facilities up to par. Here comes the indoor facility. Here comes the marquee coaching staff. Here comes the #1 recruiting class. Here comes the players who work even in their own time to try and win every game, and the fans sit back and the administrators sit back and say, that's what we want. We want a coach that's going to do everything he can to win championships. We want to recruit players who are going to do everything they can to win championships. Well, now it's time to look at the schedule and look at the administrators and say, what can we do to the schedule to make it more conducive to a national championship? Is playing Florida and Jacksonville every year more conducive to a national championship than a home-and-home would be? I don't know. I don't see Alabama playing LSU every year in New Orleans. Do I think Nick Saban would do that? Probably not. So what I see happening with Georgia right now is the program is going in a direction where no stone is being unturned, and Kirby Smart is going to take every measure necessary to get this program the national championship that's long overdue.
I think that's really interesting, Mike. I think it's a complicated story on both sides because there's a lot of strong feelings about it on both sides, but it is a really, really interesting subplot here that's going to unfold here in the months and years ahead, and I appreciate you being on top of it for Dog Nation. On the subject of the Deep South's oldest rivalry for this weekend, though, against Auburn, the one thing, Mike, I've said a lot this week is, Georgia's a big favorite in this game. You wrote about that at DawgNation.com. And certainly the Auburn ranking is going to be a lot lower than what Kentucky had, what Florida had in the last 2 weeks. But of this three-team stretch that Georgia's involved with right now, I still believe that Auburn's the toughest of the three. I think this game is destined to be the closest of the three, despite the fact that Georgia's back in home in Athens for what seems like the first time in 15 years. I feel like that Auburn is a team that can threaten Georgia in a way that Kentucky and Florida were going to be incapable of doing. I still think that Georgia probably wins the game here, but I think that Auburn's overall more talented than either of the last two teams that Georgia has played, especially along the defensive line, and I think that Georgia's going to know it's in a game from Auburn more so than it had the capability of being threatened by Florida and Kentucky. How do you land on that?
I would agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I said before the start of the year I thought this was the most losable game on the schedule, and I did not expect LSU to rise up as they have under Ed Orgeron, and kudos to LSU, and Georgia fans need to tip the cap, and instead of, talking about how dumb their coaches are, give the other team some credit. Dave Aranda is a $2.5 million a year defensive coordinator for a reason, and LSU has great athletes, and that was a tremendous environment, and Georgia didn't do themselves any favors on the opening drive with the bad fake field goal attempt or the missed open throw by Jake. Nonetheless, I digress to what you're saying here, Brandon, and I totally agree. Because of what happened last year, because of the way Auburn was able to dominate Georgia on the Plains, they're going to have some confidence. Auburn's not going to come into Sanford Stadium and go, wow. The moment's not going to be too big for them as it was for Kentucky. We saw Kentucky come apart at the seams. Kentucky football could not handle that atmosphere. You had guys getting thrown out of the game. I asked Ledbetter about it afterward. He just smiled. He said, well, you could see how they were playing. You saw them getting shipped. They could not. Benny Snell, the comparisons to Herschel Walker, they just ran their mouths to the point they could not cash the check that their mouth wrote. That's not it with Auburn. Yeah. Auburn says, you know what, we played these guys last year twice, and we beat them up good at our place, and then we didn't play real well, and our running back was hurt. And even Kirby said that Kerryon Johnson wasn't the same guy when they played him in the SEC title game. So, yes, Auburn is missing some guys. They're missing 4 of their 5 offensive linemen that we saw last year. But you know what? Georgia's missing 5 out of their 7 guys in the front. So I think those things somewhat mitigate themselves. And I think it comes down to who plays better. Listen, Auburn's won their last 2 games. They're back in the top 25 now, and they're angling for a good bowl game. And for Georgia, some people might say, well, you're in the SEC title game no matter what. Here's the deal. If you lose to Auburn or Georgia Tech, we'll throw that in there. If you lose one of these last 3 games and you lose to Alabama, you're out of the New Year's Six. You're out of that group that we call elite. The New Year's Six are the elite programs. So that's what that New Year's Six rotation has done, is redefine how we look at the bowls. If you're not in the college football playoff, boy, that stinks. But if you land in the New Year's Six bowl, you're still among that elite rotation of bowls that get all the max coverage and all the promo. You fall down to the Citrus Bowl now, or the Outback. I don't think you can go any lower than Citrus if you lose the SEC championship. That's now a second-tier bowl. That is now a second-tier bowl. And then there's obviously third tier below it. Georgia needs to win out, BA. They need to stay in this New Year's Six mix to maintain this narrative of what Kirby's doing, rebuilding this program into a dynasty.
I think that's a very fair point. What did you make of Kirby Smart's revelation yesterday that Demetrius Robertson, who fans still talk about a lot, is apparently dealing with a little bit of an injury right now? What did you make of Smart on Robertson yesterday?
Well, I didn't really even think to ask that question until about 25 minutes before the press conference, and I was just kind of going over all the stats, and I realized Demetrius hadn't touched the ball in a while, and then I noticed and so I looked at the participation chart, and he didn't play. He didn't even get on the field, and I thought that was curious. And he did travel. Me and Jeff Santel were talking about this earlier. Why would you travel a receiver who's too injured to play? So it does seem curious. Obviously, Demetrius has a lot of attention. He's a former 5-star guy from Savannah who came back home from Cal after a freshman All-American season and a sophomore year that was cut short by injury, but has not made the contributions this year that we thought he would. Well, you know what? He's not the only one. Terry Godwin hadn't made the contributions either. I mean, this is a competitive, deep receiver room, and if Demetrius is a little nicked up and can't play, I get it. I will be interested to see if he's able to contribute before the end of the year. I see a guy like that with that sort of speed and maybe see him on an end around, especially, Nicole has that ankle he left the game with. He could have come back against Kentucky. But my thought is, hey, maybe maybe you give Demetrius one of those ends arounds. You take a little bit off McColl's plate. But I'm not sure what's going on in practice. And Kirby made it clear yesterday when I asked him, he's not sure when Demetrius will be back.
So on the quarterback situation, it seems like Fromm's kind of righted his ship after the bad LSU game, played very well against Florida, played pretty well against Kentucky, although Justin Fields also got some praise for his impact in the Kentucky game after not playing at all against Florida. Heading into Auburn and the rest of this stretch run of the season, which you've rightly said is so important, what do you make of the current state of this quarterback competition between Fromm and Fields right now?
I look at it that the offense righted their ship, and it made Jake look more effective. I saw receivers that were running the right route, catching the ball. I saw an offensive line that was picking up blitzes and protecting. And Jake wasn't perfect, but you know what he does? He manages the game. That's what Jake does so well. And people, that say, oh, that's all he does. Well, listen, that's a lot. That's a lot that you don't have any delay of game penalties. That's a lot that you don't throw it to the wrong guy in the other colored jersey. It's a lot that you're able to pick between the run and the pass effectively and get your team in the position to have the most success on that run play or flip which side of the line of scrimmage the ball's going to go to. It's like flying a jet, BA. Quarterbacking requires a guy who's got his eye on all the controls, that's got a real feel for it in the changing conditions around him. And the comparison I always make with Justin and Jake is Jake's that silver-haired pilot that's been doing it with all the stripes on his sleeves. And Justin is the honor graduate out of flight school who hasn't carried passengers yet. He's got great scores off the charts, but he hasn't had to land that plane in a storm yet, and Jake has. Now, that's not to say that Justin can't do it, but there's a reliability factor there with Jake. When you've got a quarterback that's 20-3 and led your team to a national championship game appearance, really should have been a win if the secondary doesn't bust coverage on 2nd and 26. It's hard to take the ball out of his hands. Now, to Justin's credit, with his gifts, his skills, and his desires to help the team, he stepped up and solved that short yardage problem. We saw it happen twice. He converted in short yardage. You put a 6'3", 235-pound dual-threat guy back there who, to me, looks every bit the part of a young Cam Newton. That puts a lot of stress on the defense. All of a sudden, that defensive end can't come crashing in. All of a sudden, that coordinator can't call the blitz because he knows Justin Fields can beat him with his feet long enough to find the open guy. And I think we're going to continue to see that. I was kind of surprised, BA, that we didn't see it once George got inside the 5. We saw them stopped once again from the 1-yard line. Swift was stopped on a 2nd and 1 from the goal line. Jake was stopped on a 3rd and 1 from the goal line. And I'm just wondering, why isn't Justin Fields in there? Maybe we'll see that move made now moving forward in the goal line package.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Mike. We really appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily today, presented by Marco's Pizza. We'll look forward to reading more from you at DawgNation.com in the days ahead. And, of course, we'll catch up with you again on the program very soon also. Have a great week, Mike.
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I love the fighter pilot reference from Mike Griffith there in terms of the analogy for Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. Makes me think about Top Gun a little bit. Now, I'm going to date myself with this 80s movies reference, but, I mean, we would all agree, if we're doing Top Gun here, Fromm is clearly Maverick, and Justin Fields is clearly Iceman, right? If we're doing that, that's definitely the case. I don't know if that makes Jacob Eason Goose or not, but one way or another, that's the situation there. I actually really like that from these two. Maybe they'll get together and have a shirtless volleyball game at some point in time. But nonetheless, fascinating stuff from Mike Griffith. Always great to have him on the program. We'll have our buddy Benjamin Wolk here as well. Coming up in a couple of minutes, we'll focus in on the Auburn side of things for Saturday. Ben's got some great insight on Auburn, not just on the field, but also some of those key recruiting storylines after Jaden Hazelwood and Kobe Dean, two major targets, just visited Auburn this past Saturday. Ben will give us a lot on that coming up as well. Before that, though, it's our SEC Through. Of course, it's time for me also to remind you about my friends at MyBookie. And I talk to you about MyBookie a lot, and obviously you know that you can do just the straight game bets there, which is a lot of fun. But do you know they also have in-game wagering? That means that you can actually go and find MyBookie online during a game, and the point spread evolves as the game evolves. The line, the number changes. You want to talk about fun. It's a roller coaster of emotions and a great thing to do. Also, if you're a fantasy player, you may not be aware of this. MyBookie also gives you over-under options. That means you can either bet higher or lower on total fantasy points for players on NFL Sundays, which I think is really fun. It's all there for you. And right now, MyBookie's even got a great offer for DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers. Your first deposit's going to be matched up to 50%. But you got to go right now. Use the promo code DawgNation, all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, D-A-W-G, all one word, DawgNation. Simply find MyBookie online, M-Y-B-O-O-K-I-E. Find them online. Use the promo code DawgNation. Get your first deposit matched up to 50%, and then you play, you win, you get paid. It's as simple as that with my friends at MyBookie, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. All right, a couple of SEC stories to get to. First of all, there were a lot of SEC teams in the college football playoff top 25 last night. And for the most part, obviously, it's hard to dispute that this thing seems like we're heading towards an obvious conclusion with who the 4 teams are, at least who the 4 representatives are. We don't know the Big Ten champion yet. We don't know the SEC champion yet. But it seems obvious that it's Big Ten champ, SEC champ, Notre Dame if it wins out, likely Clemson if it wins out, making the top 4. But that doesn't mean there aren't some interesting things being said about the rest of the sport in these rankings that were released late last night, because of the college basketball debut. Alabama at 1, Georgia's at 5 on this list this week. LSU doesn't drop very far. They're still at 7. How about Kentucky, after getting beaten up at home, doesn't drop very far. They're at 11. Florida's at 15 after just getting manhandled by Missouri. Mississippi State's at 16. Auburn is at 24. So Georgia's opponent for this week sneaks into the rankings. I think what the committee's telling you here, whether they intend to or not, is the SEC for the most part is back. And there is a lot of SEC fatigue around the country. But it's very difficult to dispute, not just because of what the SEC is doing this season, but because of what the rest of the sport's kind of not doing. You know, the ACC doesn't have a whole lot going on. The Big Ten, beyond Ohio State and Michigan, doesn't have a whole lot going on. There's a level of consistency year over year that the SEC is able to maintain. And as much as it pains some people to say the SEC is back as unquestionably the premier conference in college football, these rankings, I think, validate that even more. Some people are saying, well, why did LSU not fall farther? Why did Florida, Kentucky not fall farther? Because there's no one to put in their place here. These teams are just better than the rest of the country. So keep that in mind. If something weird and screwy does happen, there does become the possibility, the option of getting 2 SEC teams in the top 25, or I should say in the college football playoff. The top 25 right now is telling you that's something that maybe is worthy of consideration there. All right, a couple other stories to get to here. Interesting Florida quarterback controversy. Luke Del Rio goes on social media and says that if Dan Mullen doesn't make a quarterback switch, then there may be some outrage on the part of Florida fans. Felipe Franks wasn't too happy about that, and I think it just speaks to the way that Florida's season, ranked 15th or not, is really kind of tail-spinning right now. And I think that Del Rio's probably right about this. And frankly, he would know better than anybody, because I think that Jim McElwain felt he had to go away from Del Rio at the start of the 2016 season. Florida fans are tired of not having a quarterback, and I think that Del Rio actually speaks for the pulse of the fan base when he says what he says. I mentioned earlier Auburn Athletic Director Alan Green. It's probably also worth pointing out here that Green, in one of those same events this week, also talked a bit about Gus Malzahn, essentially giving Malzahn a vote of confidence. It sounds like Malzahn will be back for 2019. I know a lot of Georgia fans would love to see their team on Saturday make Auburn regret that decision, and Malzahn, or I should say Green, regret what he said there. We'll see how that plays out. And then one more quick story to get to for our SEC through here. Looks like Kelly Bryant, the former Clemson quarterback, is also considering another SEC school. There are some rumors that he might be interested in Mississippi State here as well. So interesting stuff on the horizon for Kelly Bryant. Now, before I bring on my good buddy and our former colleague Benjamin Wolk here to talk about the Georgia-Auburn game on Saturday, let me also remind you that around here we don't just celebrate Georgia on the football field. We also celebrate the work being done in the classroom and around the country and around the world on behalf and on part of the University of Georgia. For instance, did you know that 96% of all UGA undergraduate students are employed or pursuing advanced degrees within 6 months of graduation? That's part of what makes a UGA education so impactful, are the opportunities that students have beyond the walls of the classroom. All UGA students are required to engage in at least one approved experiential learning activity that enhances learning and positions them for success after graduation. Well, the University of Georgia's Experiential Learning Initiative gives students hands-on opportunities to connect their academic foundations to the real world through creative endeavors, study abroad initiatives, and field schools. Also internships, leadership opportunities, and so much more. But to make these kinds of opportunities available, more is needed to be done by the folks who are so proud of those Georgia degrees they have. That's why if you are proud of your own Georgia degree, a great way to show that is go to this website, give.uga.edu. That's give.uga.edu, and you can find out how you can get involved in the great work that's being done around the world on behalf of the University of Georgia and set up the next generation of UGA graduates for a great success there as well. With that said, let's talk to Benjamin Wolk here right now, a great former colleague of ours, now covering Auburn and Auburn recruiting for Rivals.com. Ben, thanks for being back here on DawgNation Daily. Hope you're doing well today. All right, we'll get Ben here in just a moment. Take care of that with him. Looks like we may have Ben here. Hey, Ben, how you doing? Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Brandon. Glad to be back on.
So it's good to have you on the program, and I just mentioned before you joined us a moment ago, it sounds like Alan Green, the Auburn athletic director, giving a little bit of a vote of confidence here for Gus Malzahn to return for 2019. Does that mean that the hot seat talk has officially cooled off? Is that a binding referendum, in other words, what Green says there? And are Auburn fans going to be happy about that if Malzahn is indeed back at a very expensive price for 2019?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's binding as in the end-all, be-all, but I would say that he was pretty decisive in what he said in terms of Gus Malzahn being the coach of the future at Auburn. In his mind, that he trusts that he can get Auburn through some adversity and that he's proven that he can do that in the past. So I think that he was pretty clear in what he was saying. Whether or not, that's the final end of this Gus Malzahn hot seat equation, I'm not so certain about that. With that said, in terms of the fan base, I think that there's a lot of people that have already made up their mind on Gus Malzahn, and they've decided that they do not want him to be the head coach at Auburn. I think that is going to create this sort of lingering conversation, that keeps popping up year after year after every single loss. I think that's just something that Auburn fans are going to have to come to expect. And I think that it's somewhat similar to what Georgia went through with Mark Richt. In terms of when losses happen, these are the types of conversations that are going to come up on a regular basis.
What about the assistants here for a moment? Because it's easy to forget Kevin Steele. Now, he's been a good defensive coordinator, but he makes, I think, more than $2 million a year. There's always this issue with the offensive coordinator in terms of how much control Malzahn's willing to give that guy. Didn't seem to give a whole lot of control and freedom to Rhett Lashley. Lashley bolted. I thought that Chip Lindsey, the current offensive coordinator, would have more freedom. There's some dispute about whether or not that's true here. If Malzahn stays, what are the likelihood that Lindsey and Steele are back again next year?
Yeah, at this point, I fully expect Gus Malzahn to be back, and I think that Steele, he just signed his that $2.5 million contract you were talking about. He just signed that actually the week after they lost to Tennessee, so I think that he was sort of, trying to position himself maybe for a little bit slightly better contract, and ended up inking that one once they lost to Tennessee, maybe, realizing sort of the writing on the wall and the way that the season could be turning. As for Chip Lindsey, I would be surprised if Chip Lindsey came back for the 2019 season. That is not just on Auburn's end. Auburn has had their fair share of offensive struggles this season, and I think that Gus Malzahn, him sticking around for the 2019 season, he's going to have to make some changes just to satisfy people at Auburn. And I think that starts on the offensive side, obviously, and that starts with the offensive coordinator. And I think that on Chip Lindsey's end, he maybe wants to find a different role for himself as well that he thinks fits a little bit better. But I also think that the way these last two games, these big games against Georgia and Alabama shape out are going to dictate the narrative a lot. I don't think that there's many people that expect them to win these games, but the way that these games play out, I think, do matter just in terms of how Auburn sort of feels about itself going into the offseason. There's
been a lot of rumors coming out of Auburn that some players may have grown dissatisfied with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback. They no longer believed in him necessarily, didn't like a lot of the body language that Stidham showed after games. And yet when you watch the Texas A&M game on Saturday, an Auburn win, Stidham in the passing game is really offensively the only thing that Auburn seems to have going for it right now. As you know, Tigers can't really run the ball at all right now. So what do you make of the current state of the Auburn offense? It sounds like people are disappointed in Stidham's year, and yet, because of some issues along the offensive line and because of, for whatever reason, not really establishing that next generation, Kerryon Johnson-style running back, Stidham may be the only thing about the Auburn offense that seems to really be able to kind of get going right now. You're there every week. You see it every week. What do you make of the status of that offense at the moment?
Yeah, Auburn's offense is an interesting case study this year because, you mentioned there was some mid-season discord. You lose back-to-back games to Mississippi State and Tennessee, and the offense does little to nothing. You're going to have a lot of people that are frustrated, and when it comes to inside the locker room discord, you're going to have a lot of people pointing fingers at the theoretical leader of the offense and say, what's going on? Why are you not doing your part? I think some of those Stidham struggles were a little bit overstated. This offensive line has been among the worst in the conference. You could argue among the worst in Power 5 this season. The running game has been virtually non-existent. They just rushed for 19 yards on 18 carries last week against Texas A&M. And have had multiple games this season, back-to-back mid-year, where they rushed for less than 100 yards. And it's just so uncharacteristic of Gus Malzahn offenses. And I think that you're finding Auburn still trying to figure itself out and identify. Look, we had a press conference with Gus Malzahn on Tuesday, and I would venture to say about half of it was talking about whether they would consider going with a little bit more 2-minute type of offense and just, sort of fun and gun type of deal, because that's what they had so much success with at the end of the Texas A&M game, and they just haven't been able to manufacture yards elsewhere. I think that Gus Malzahn is somewhat stubborn in his ways, and he goes in with game plans, and he, wants to try and establish the run as much as he can, but that just really hasn't happened much this season outside of the Ole Miss game when Boobie Whitlow had his 170-yard outing. And, Boobie Whitlow's been a little banged up as well, so when he's fully healthy, the running game is a little bit different, and this, it's a really young running back core. So Auburn's offense just has several issues right now, and I don't know if there's necessarily a clear-cut answer, but I don't think that bashing Stidham necessarily was the right one, just because he doesn't have a ton to work with around him, though they do have good wide receiver weapons on the perimeter.
I want to get a thought from you on this Saturday's game to close out here. Let me do a couple quick recruiting things before we get there, though, Ben, if you don't mind. This past Saturday for that Texas A&M game, Jaden Hazelwood, the 5-star wide receiver, 5-star linebacker, Nakobe Dean were both at Auburn taking big visits there. Now, Dean, I guess, is supposed to be in Georgia this week, and then Hazelwood's coming for the Tech game to end the season. How did things go for Hazelwood and Dean there with their visit to Auburn on Saturday?
And I'll throw in another one as well. Tyreek Stevenson.
Good point.
Was on his
good point. Yeah, good point.
I guess I'll start. I think that coming into the weekend, just from my perspective, I saw all three of those guys as probably more Georgia leans. Well, I guess Jaden Hazelwood's sort of the outlier, but Nakobe Dean and Tyreek Stevenson, guys that are sort of Georgia leans that Auburn has been hanging around in more than people maybe have been giving Auburn credit for, but they, had some work to do. I think that they still probably stand in a similar position on that front with both of those guys. I think that, Tyreek Stevenson and Nakobe Dean will both be there this week. And I know that Tyreek Stevenson, just reading between the lines a little bit, just before I got on this call with you, Auburn took a defensive back, in-state defensive back commitment from Nehemiah Pritchett from down in Mobile, Alabama. And he's a guy that Auburn's been evaluating for a while. The fact that they finally take his commitment on the heels of a Tyreek Stevenson official visit probably gives you an idea of where they feel like they stack up against Georgia in that battle. I do think that that is actually a Georgia-Auburn battle, and I think that Tyreek wants to get out of the Miami area personally. As for Nakobe Dean, I think that Georgia and Alabama are probably the front runners there, though Auburn has sort of hung around with Travis Williams, as you've heard, with other linebacker commitments like, Owen Papo, for instance. Guys are very interested in Travis Williams, and they like what he is doing at Auburn. With Jaden Hazelwood, it's not very often that you get bad news on official visits and that you come away, saying, oh, this didn't go very well. But Jaden Hazelwood came on his official visit Friday night, and he didn't stay on Saturday night. Generally, Auburn, official visits, as is the case in most places, they stay, Friday to Sunday. They have long, extended conversations with coaches on Sunday. afternoon. I don't know the extent of the reason behind Jason Hazelwood's early departure from that official visit, but he did not say. I personally, at this point, do not expect Auburn to really be a factor for Jaden Hazelwood down the stretch. So, that was sort of an interesting development that took place this weekend.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Ben. Thanks for your candid comments about that. Really quickly here, the Owen Popo thing, obviously, on this show, we've talked about Popo 9 million times. Here we are, Auburn playing Georgia. Is Popo still going to sign with Auburn? I've heard some Tennessee rumors as of late. How solid is Popo still with Auburn? And do you hear anything about any Georgia involvement there whatsoever at this point?
Well, he is expected to be at the Georgia-Auburn game this weekend. Again, you never really know how much that is him wanting to go see Auburn versus him actually going and taking a real recruiting visit to Georgia. From my understanding, Georgia has stepped back, considerably on their, full force recruitment of Owen Papo. I'll be interested to see if he is in Athens this weekend, as he's expected to be. How much recruiting really is going on there. You mentioned Tennessee. Auburn would have preferred that Owen did not make a visit to Tennessee last weekend with Wanye Morris for a few reasons. I think they would have loved for him to be in Auburn just for that environment and that comeback win with a couple big official visitors on campus. But also, they just want to hold on to him. I think that a lot of what Owen has been doing in terms of looking around, whether it be Tennessee or, staying in contact with Georgia or Clemson, whoever it may be, he's just covering his bases. He's heard the coaching rumors that have been out there about Auburn's coaching staff, and I think, that any smart recruit is going to do his due diligence to, just on the off chance that things do go awry at the school that they're committed to. I don't see a situation where Travis Williams isn't Auburn's linebackers coach and next season, and for that reason, I don't see a scenario where Owen Papo doesn't sign with Auburn in December.
Before we let you go, how do you see this Georgia-Auburn game playing out on Saturday?
Honestly, Auburn's had so much trouble running the football this season. I don't really see that changing much this weekend against Georgia. Whether they change their offensive game plan or not, I guess that's something for Georgia fans to maybe keep an eye out on. Do they get a different Auburn than everybody else has been getting this season? I know that's always a coach's worst nightmare when they're playing a team like, a guy like Gus who always does this window dressing and things like that, and you prepare for all of these things, and then if they do throw something a little bit different at you, I guess that is, a coach's concern. But I just think that with Auburn's offensive inefficiencies this season, I don't see that changing much against Georgia. And then really, if you look at Auburn's defense, I know everyone loves to praise this Auburn defense, and for the most part, they have been really good this season. But you look at the Texas A&M game last week or the Mississippi State game earlier in the season, they've had a couple of instances where they've given up, 200-plus yards rushing, and they're going to get up against the number one rushing offense in the SEC this week. They've got to correct that. Earlier in the season when they gave up 200-plus to Nick Fitzgerald and Mississippi State, they followed it up the next week, only giving up 61 rushing yards to Tennessee, which obviously isn't nearly the potent rushing offense that Georgia is. But they, in that same game, gave up 11 of 14 passing to Jarrett Guarantano. So they're going to have to find some sort of defensive consistency and hope that they can somehow replicate that performance that they put on in Auburn last year, where they only gave up 46 rushing yards to Georgia. And I personally just don't see that happening. So I think Georgia, 14.5 points, I'd probably take Georgia covering, to be honest with you.
That's really fascinating stuff, Ben. It's great to get a chance to talk to you. For Georgia fans who want to see more of your work, especially for those moments in which the Georgia-Auburn recruiting storylines overlap, how can we find more of you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Benjamin Wolk, W-O-L-K, and then auburnsports.com, part of the Rivals Network.
Ben, it's great to talk to you. We'll look forward to hopefully seeing you in Athens on Saturday.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Brandon.
All right, really good stuff. Love having Ben Wolk on the program. And by the way, really, really great information from him on those three big visitors to Auburn this past weekend. I take that as really good news from a Georgia standpoint on Tyreek Stevenson. Then Auburn hosts Stevenson, and now, as Ben says, a couple days later, they're taking another defensive back's commitment. That's obviously not a great sign for how they think things went with Stevenson. Pretty fascinating. And then the Kobe Dean thing overall a little different in that, he says that, Alabama's still the number one competitor for Georgia there, but the Georgia interest doesn't change after visiting Auburn. But then really, really compelling information when it comes to Jaden Hazelwood, who Ben kind of confirms the rumors that were out there that Jeff also referenced on Tuesday, the idea that Hazelwood left that official visit early. Pretty interesting stuff. Let me also say, Georgia fans, 739 days it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten your Bulldogs. That's 739 days of happiness. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, let's dive in here and get some comments. Really packed, loaded show. I'd love to hear a lot of your thoughts on it. And if you don't mind, let me try to bring the thing from the beginning of the show back here right now. Am I wrong for saying that Georgia ought to be careful about flipping its schedule rotation with Auburn here? I have no problem with getting the traditional, what used to be, I guess, even year, actually odd year home games, right? Yeah, odd year home games, even year road games. I don't have a problem with flipping that back, but I get a little nervous with the idea of moving the Georgia-Auburn game up in the schedule because it's helping Auburn. I think Georgia's been too quick in the past to help its rivals without getting anything in return. I'm skeptical of that. I'd be curious to find out your thoughts on that, so you can weigh in. By the way, Winston Mock thinks Georgia wins 34-10 on Saturday. That's quite a statement. Hayes Calloway says, B, I'm watching you on TV right now on YouTube. That's one of the great things with the YouTube method of watching on video is you can be right there on your TV screen. Now, I don't know if you want my fat face any fatter on that big screen TV, but nonetheless, if that's the way that you're accessing the program, I know many of you do it the same way. We appreciate you doing that, Hayes Calloway included. Casey Cochran says, does DJ Daniels' flip affect things with Tyreek Stevenson and Khair Elam? No, I don't believe it does. I think they're all takes for Georgia, and I think that remained true. I think that Daniel was always a take for UGA. He made a little bit of an unusual decision when he picked South Carolina, but Georgia never stopped recruiting him, and that's pretty much what we called at the time. Phil Rogers says, don't change anything with Auburn. Yeah, I mean, that would be my stance to start off with, Phil, and everything's a negotiation. I'd be curious to find out what you're going to give me for not changing. I just think that at times Georgia's been a little too cooperative with the SEC, too cooperative with, really the NCAA at times, frankly. I mean, I thought that the way this program handled the Todd Gurley suspension back in 2014, I thought that was the wrong way to handle it, and an outlier in comparison to how Johnny Manziel and Texas A&M handled similar accusations, and Florida State handled similar autograph accusations against Jameis Winston. I thought that Georgia was way too cooperative in that instance, to be completely honest with you. And I think that, you don't get a gold star for cooperating and bending over backwards with your rivals. You want to negotiate here and you want to give me something for moving the game up, then I'll consider it. But just doing it because you want to, I don't like. And the other thing, and I meant to mention this during the regular broadcast, I guess I probably should. For some reason, and look, there's a chance I just don't know what I'm talking about here, and I'm in over my skis. But the fact that Auburn has already scheduled a game for 2020, that's the time they would normally play Georgia, and they're essentially trying to strong-arm their way into the schedule switch that they want. I don't like that either. Now, of course, they can it's UMass, so they can cancel UMass like I cancel brunch plans. But nonetheless, I just don't like that. I don't like that at all. And the fact that Auburn's got a problem with its schedule right now, your problem ain't my problem. And as people have said about the SEC for a long time, there's no sense complaining about your problems because a lot of programs have the same problem. The other part of the league is glad you've got those problems. And in this particular case, I think that's very, very true. Kristen Phillips on YouTube says the Georgia offense is showing great balance right now. Defense coming into their own. We are peaking at the right time. We will roll Auburn and carry this energy right into December. So I think that Kristen makes a very interesting comment. And, I have said that I think that Georgia probably gets challenged a bit by Auburn on Saturday. If I turn out to be wrong on that, and Kristen turns out to be right, that for all the reasons she describes Georgia rolls, I do think that's a major statement. And this point that I've made heading towards the first Saturday in December of Georgia has a chance to win, I would upgrade that prediction even more if we're talking about, if Georgia beats Auburn 31-10, 37-13, something along those lines, if it really, really flexes at home in front of a wild atmosphere. If that's the performance you get from Georgia on Saturday, then I do think that's a major statement about how much this team has improved. And this whole idea of peaking at the right time that she references, I think that's potentially very true. And one of the reasons why that is true is, as Uncle D points out, that DeAndre Swift looks healthy right now. That tandem of running back at Georgia right now is very dangerous. C. Hill says, am I doing an autograph signing? No, I don't have any plans on doing that anytime soon. K9 Blues says, not sure on any hard facts, but nothing has changed, and we've been in the race. Miami continues to tank while not looking great. I think that's a Jaden Hazelwood reference. The truth is, I think Hazelwood's coming to Georgia. I do. Now, I'm also wrong a lot, but I think the Hazelwood's coming to Georgia. K9 Blues, how about this? Backhanded compliment. This is hurtful, K9. Come on now. He says, I'm shocked. The show actually started right at the top of the hour today. Ouch. That's painful. But I'm glad to know he did start on time, though. Justin Diggins says that was actually a reference to Khairi Elam. Yeah, Elam I don't know as much about, but, I know about him. I don't have as strong of a feeling about Elam, but I'm assuming he's coming to Georgia, too. Yeah, sorry about that, Jason F. I was thinking you were talking Hazelwood. That's Elam. I think that ultimately Georgia's going to get Elam, Stevenson, and Daniel. That's what I think, and then need them. But I could be wrong about that. Memphis Dog says he wants to get Eddie's autograph. So when I was a kid, used to get Uga's autograph, whichever Uga that was at the time. I guess it would have been like Uga 4. I don't know if Uga still does this or not, but he'd put his paw in ink, and then he'd put his paw on the like whatever thing you had. A lot of times it'd be like an Uga poster, and you get Uga's autograph. That's how you got Uga's autograph. Maybe we could do the same thing with Eddie, where it's like a little paw and be in ink, and then he can, put it over here. I wouldn't mind that. I can promise you get a lot more for Eddie's autograph on eBay than you get for mine. Diedrich Frazier says, I'm angry at the thought of Georgia doing anything to help Auburn. And I guess, Diedrich, that's kind of my point on that, too. Rob D says, BA, do you think that we should switch the Florida series to a home and home? So I kind of feel the same way about this that I do the black jerseys. I'm a traditionalist in both accounts. I like red jerseys at home, white jerseys on the road. I want to see silver breeches every single game. I'm just a traditionalist on that. But as I said yesterday, I'm also a little bit of a populist in that, if Georgia fans took a vote on this, and if 51% of the fans wanted blackouts for big games, I guess I just let them do it. I guess who am I to stand in the way there in that regard? About the Georgia-Florida series, if it's a vote, I'm voting to keep the game in Jacksonville. I think that's kind of a cool thing. It does hurt UGA recruiting. I thought what Kirby Smart said about that yesterday was probably right, but Georgia seems to be doing just fine, even with that governor on the progress. So if I'm voting, I guess I'd probably vote to keep it in Jacksonville. I love being at the King and Prince a couple weeks ago. I love what Larry Munson said in 1980 about all those dog people that have those condominiums for 4 and 5 days. That's a really cool college football tradition. To be at the beach in October ain't a bad deal for the people who are lucky enough to get a chance to actually do that. But if the majority of Georgia fans wanted a better home game every other year, that's also a valid opinion. And, maybe this is one of those things where we do one day try to, because obviously DawgNation's got a following big enough that the votes we could potentially collect, while it's not scientific, it's certainly significant because of the number of votes we could potentially tabulate here. I'd be kind of interested to see, do a majority of Georgia fans want the Georgia-Florida game in Athens and then Gainesville? And do the majority of Georgia fans, prefer the black jerseys or the stuff like that? I'd be okay with finding out what the Democratic solution for would be, I guess. Pine Sol Lemon Scent says, second day in a row checking in late because of work. Pine Sol, we just appreciate you being here when you can. Our deal is we'll be here every day, and you show up when you can. But we're really glad that you've spent a couple minutes with us here today. Winston Mock says, I almost want to see Georgia take a knee at the 1 yard line just to see if it's capable of scoring from the goal line. Yeah, I kind of know what you mean by that. Levi Franklin, thanks for the kind words. Robert Barnes says the best thing is to quit talking about Mel Tucker leaving until the end of the season. So, Robert, here's my feeling on that. And this is no disrespect to Tucker, but I am not that worried about talk of either coordinator leaving during the season. I just don't think that's a distraction for Georgia. I think that Georgia, even if Tucker is interviewing for these jobs during the year, which I guess is probably not going on, but Georgia's got capable defensive minds of filling in the slack there. The same thing were to happen on offense. Jim Chaney goes to interview for the whatever job. Georgia's got a lot of folks that can fill in that role, and I think would be just fine. Let me tell you what makes me nervous is the thought that James Coley's not recruiting come December, or the thought that Mel Tucker's not recruiting come December, or, Glenn Schumann's interviewing to be a defensive coordinator somewhere, and maybe he's not, burning the candle at both ends the way that we've come to expect him doing. That's my nerve-wracking thing. Georgia, to me, is a weird program in that it seems like most programs live in fear of losing their best coordinators. With all due respect to Tucker and Chaney, who I think are, competent, accomplished coaches, the Georgia fan, I think, lives in fear of losing position coaches. Pittman along the offensive line. McGee as a running backs coach. Coley as, a quarterbacks coach, although he's really just sort of a South Florida recruiter. I mean, he's a good coach, but you know what I mean. That's the real fear for Georgia. It's these position coaches who make the recruiting work the way it's supposed to go. I live in fear of those guys getting promotions, and obviously they deserve promotions. I hope they get a chance to further their career, but it's always seeming like, can you just wait one more year before you do? Can you wait one more year before you go take that next big job as a head coach somewhere else or something like that? Because I think that McGee and Coley and all those guys are future head coaches, and you just sort of hope that could you stick around a little bit longer? So that's my big fear. It's not losing Tucker to a head coach. It's losing a position coach heading toward signing day. Maybe you disagree, though. Ren Elliott, this is the one point that all Georgia fans can agree, that it seems like you do see shiny silver britches on other teams. Why can't Georgia find them? He references Ohio State. I was watching the Dallas Cowboys on Monday Night Football. Now, the NFL uniforms are Nike again, right? Like, why does Dallas have those shiny silver britches and Georgia's got this, this bland gray deal? I don't get that. I don't get that. Steve Highland says blackout should be for homecoming only. I'd be okay with that. I'd also be okay with blackouts being for senior day. Every year you wear the black jerseys, not because of it's a big game motivation, but as a way of honoring, whether it be, the seniors in their last game. I'd be fine with that. Ryan Woody Wood says, if you ever went to the game in Jacksonville, you wouldn't want it anywhere else. Ryan, in a roundabout way, is right. There is a divide between the people who do attend that game regularly, especially the South Georgia fans, or that huge contingent of Jacksonville area Georgia fans. There is a bias here, right? If you don't attend the game, then you probably don't care about it being in Jacksonville. You'd maybe rather it be in Athens every other year because you're more likely to go. If you watch the games on TV, you may not have a strong connection to the game in Jacksonville either. But for the people who are lucky enough to be there, I do feel like they feel the strongest about keeping it in Jacksonville. James Crump says Jacksonville used to be a home field advantage for Florida. Now we have overcome that, and I'm good with it being in Jacksonville. That's an interesting point by James. The other thing about this is, towards the end of the Richt era, we started hearing stories about how the team was busing from Athens to Atlanta and then flying from Atlanta to Jacksonville. Now, they shouldn't be doing that. And if that's the case, then that is bad. But if they're flying directly from Athens to Jacksonville, which they probably are doing now, right? Do we know that, Connor? Do they fly from Athens to Jacksonville now? Yeah, so if they're doing that, it's really not any difference. Ask the team, would they rather, bus to Columbia or fly to Jacksonville? I think they would rather fly to Jacksonville. It's just easier, especially if you're going from the Athens airport. So I think that James is right that, maybe a few years ago it had more of the feel of being a little bit more like a Florida home game. But, Georgia fans take over every stadium for the most part now. Looks like James Livingston's got some tickets for sale. Y'all check that out if you're interested. Larry Stanley says, B.A., am I the only one who has noticed that Fromm tends to latch on to one receiver during stretches of the game? Larry, I don't know. Obviously J.J. Holloman's becoming a bit of a go-to guy for Fromm right now. I don't know how different that makes Fromm than other quarterbacks. Obviously, the gold standard here right now, unfortunately, is Tua Tagovailoa, and one of the things that Tua does well is throw the ball to all fields, to all receivers. There's no denying that. But I don't know how much Fromm is different from other quarterbacks when it comes to that kind of thing, because I'm not obviously watching other quarterbacks as closely as I'm watching Fromm. Miriam Martin Corbin says, don't forget about Mel Tucker. He does recruit great, though. Yeah, listen, there are a lot of players that like Mel Tucker. There's no doubt. Tori Inslee says that losing Sam Pittman would hurt. Yeah, that'd be very painful. Very painful. Jeff Connell says, will Zamir White be a factor next year? Zeus, as his great nickname is. I'm assuming so. I mean, certainly hopeful of that. I mean, I think that, one thing that Zamir showed you with the first ACL injury is he's one of these warrior rehabilitators, much the same way that Nick Chubb was. So I'm going to keep a good thought about Zamir in that regard. And this winter, that's going to be one of those big storylines. Now, Georgia's also looking to bring in a top flight back for 2019 class. Maybe that's not John Emery Jr. anymore. Maybe that's somebody else. But that need to make sure you've got an elite back added to the mix for 2019 is something that Georgia's going to still pursue because of the uncertain status of Zamir White. We'll wait and see how much James Cook becomes a factor before the year is done. Don't forget Elijah Holyfield, Brian Harry, and they could try their hand at the NFL if they wanted to. So that running back position is going to be very interesting to watch this offseason. Jason F. says, black jerseys look cool, and the young players and recruits like stuff like that, so bring them out. It's not going to give our opponents extra motivation. Interesting point by Jason. The one thing I do adamantly believe is that the recruiting impact of the alternate jerseys is completely overstated. I think that apparel companies like alternate jerseys because it gives them more stuff to sell, but ultimately, even if recruits do prefer the black jersey, and it's hard to deny they do because they always photograph themselves wearing the black jersey, ultimately they don't choose schools for that reason. If they did, then, a school like Florida that wears a different uniform every week, or Kentucky that wears seemingly a different uniform every week, they'd be getting all the recruits, and poor Alabama wouldn't be getting anybody because Alabama doesn't even do any kind of uniform changes. But we know that's not the case. They do these surveys, like 24/7 Sports does this, where they'll ask recruits, who's got the ugliest uniform in college football? Alabama, I don't want to say wins that award, but they finish first on that voting virtually every single year. It's Penn State or it's Alabama. Penn State's not a bad recruiting program either. Alabama's the best, and they got the ugliest uniforms according to the people making the choices to go to the schools here. So I've always felt like that the recruiting impact of alternate jerseys is grossly overstated. Let me get a few more here. K9 Blue says, BA, do you think that Jamari Salyer may not be playing because the plan is to redshirt him like we did Ben Cleveland? So I don't know how many games Salyer's played in. Has he not played in more than 4? I would have thought he'd played in more than 4 games. The truth is, you have to read Jeff's freshman report on that to be sure. I'm not sure how many games he's played. I think the issue with Salyer, though, is that Mays was here earlier and Trey Hill was here earlier. I know that's kind of a beating a dead horse. I think I probably said that a million times, but I do really believe that's true. That the spring arrival for both those guys gave them a leg up, and they've utilized it. Not only did Mays have the practice time, and not only did Hill have the practice time, but they utilized it to become good players. And when they got in, with the exception of the one bad snap from Hill on Saturday, they've made the most of that opportunity. The other thing about Salyer is that he's trying to get that freshman year playing time at a time in which it's just harder to do at Georgia. If Salyer had been a freshman last year, he'd probably be starting, from the word go, maybe. But this year it's just a little bit deeper. So I don't think that anything has changed in terms of the viewpoint that Salyer is an elite prospect. Salyer, Hill, and Mays, all three are really thought to be top-flight prospects. It is probably a little bit of a surprise in some respects that Salyer, who was thought to outrate the other two, has probably, fallen slightly behind the other two. But I don't think the overall story with Salyer has changed here. And I apologize for not knowing if he's played in 4 games or not, but I don't know the answer to that. K9 Blues comes back and says, BA, even this late in the year, I know the beginning of the season, but I guess I thought he was just that elite generational talent coming out of high school. That's about Salyer as well. I think the issue, though, here is that playing time has its own kind of version of compound interest that, those guys earned some early playing time earlier, and then they got some experience on the field, and that allows them to grow even faster. So I think when it's all said and done, Mays and Hill and Salyer could end up with very similar careers, but being in the right place in the right time to get some early playing time, and then performing well in that spot sort of sets together a spiraled series of events where all of a sudden that Mays and Hill are getting even better, even faster. Let me pop over here on Facebook a little bit more. Mary Roman says, keep recruiting those top running backs. Georgia's prepared so many to play in the NFL. Yeah, listen, that is clearly that's a big brand for Georgia right now, and I imagine they will keep doing that. By the way, there's a pinned comment on Facebook. I should have mentioned this earlier. We do have Before the Hedges this afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for plenty more recruiting talk. That's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of fun. A lot to get to today when it comes to that stuff. Robert Barnes says, I feel like I have a different view on some of these subjects that come up because he looks at them as if he was a recruit instead of a fan. Clearly, there are some moments in which fans and recruits, for the most part, have different viewpoints. That's certainly fair to be said, that they're different constituencies that have to be pleased from time to time. Juan Alvarez says, do you think we would ever go with the Jordan brand instead of Nike? I guess anything is possible. It seems like Georgia's been with Nike for a long time. I guess anything's possible. For some reason, and I'm not into the sneaker wars, so I don't necessarily have a favorite sneaker company for the most part. But when it comes to the uniforms, I do always feel like the Adidas uniforms and the Under Armour uniforms look worse than the other uniforms. So I guess I'd be okay with Jordan brand as long as Georgia didn't go Adidas or Under Armour. And for the most part, I don't care. But for some reason, I feel like the Adidas, A&M's uniforms, Tennessee's old uniforms, I sort of feel like Adidas has never gotten uniforms right. Although I do admit that Adidas can make a pretty comfortable sneaker. But for the most part, I don't think they'd make great-looking uniforms. All right, we got to get ready to go. Scott Harris says over-under on Big Ben pancakes this Saturday. Now, I know that Ben could put away some pancakes if he's eating, but what he's referencing is pancakes on the field as a blocker. And, yeah, listen, if Cleveland's ready to go this weekend, I know he's going to be chomping at the bit, and I bet he's going to be laying waste to some Auburn players, much like he did in the SEC championship game a year ago, or almost a year ago now. Philip Jordan Wells also brings up a good point that Florida is now a Jordan brand team, so if you're Georgia, going to be careful about following down the same road they went down on. Matt Rukavina says Georgia should stay Nike. Jeremy Lloyd likes the Under Armour. For some reason, I've never been a huge Under Armour fan. And like I said, I've got no dog in the fight in that for the most part. For the most part, I don't. But that's never been my apparel gear of choice. Anyway, we got to get ready to go. Really good stuff. Thank you all for being here today. We do have Before the Hedges at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Really fun, in-depth recruiting talk with Jeff Sintel. A lot of news to get to on the heels of these Auburn visits. The Benjamin Wolk referenced, the DJ Daniel commitment, huge visitor list forming for Saturday, including the 5-star N'Kobe Dean. So it will be busy on Before the Hedges this afternoon at 3 p.m. And I'll be in street clothes today. No Halloween costume for me today there in that regard. But I'll look forward to seeing you nonetheless. If you missed a portion of our broadcast today, you can check out the podcast. We'll have it posted for you on all the various podcast channels coming up right away here. And we'll be back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live presented by Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great day. We will look forward to seeing you then.